Darth Vader and Yoda. Two of some of the strongest Force users that never came face to face. But why? If Vader was so obsessed with hunting Jedi, why didn't he ever hunt down Yoda, who was arguably the most powerful one of them all? Well, in this video, we're gonna unravel that mystery and share why Vader refused to hunt Yoda down after Order 66. So let's get right into it. After Order 66, thousands of Jedi were wiped out across the galaxy, and only a select few survived. It's said that about 99% of all Jedi died during these tragic events, but as we all know, one of those Jedi who did survive it was Yoda. As we saw in the original trilogy, Yoda chose the planet Dagobah as his hiding place, and he remained in exile there for almost 2 decades. This is pretty impressive, considering most Jedi were eventually caught at some point or another. Even if they did originally survive Order 66, the Empire was ruthless, and they went to any lengths possible to make sure that the Jedi were all wiped out. Now, Palpatine himself wasn't the one who really did much of the Jedi hunting though. Once the Empire rose to power, Palpatine would just sit in his chair and stick to politics really. Instead, he had Vader do all the dirty work for him, and that included making sure the Jedi were hunted down. Vader, along with his team of Inquisitors, were responsible for wiping out Jedi across the galaxy, and that really became their primary focus. By the time of A New Hope, most Jedi were wiped out, and there were really barely any survivors left. That was except for Yoda. Now, the real question here is why? Why not hunt down the Grand Master of the Jedi Order? Why not go after the one who's arguably the biggest threat of them all, and by far the most powerful one? Well, we have an answer. See, if we rewind back to Revenge of the Sith, we saw the epic duel between Palpatine and Yoda, and how Yoda lost in the end. As we all saw, Yoda tumbled to the ground, and was able to escape. But the thing is, Palpatine knew he survived. He knew Yoda was out there somewhere, which is why he had his clone troopers search for him immediately. At that point, Yoda was a major threat, especially since Palpatine still had no idea what was happening with Vader on Mustafar, and whether he had lost or won. So yes, originally Yoda was a high priority to Palpatine, but here's now where things take a shift. Once the Empire started becoming established, the priority to find Yoda wasn't really a thing anymore. Instead, there was no big concern in finding him, and Palpatine himself really put no effort in having Vader and his Inquisitors look for him. The reason why? Well, over time, Palpatine saw way more pleasure in having Yoda watch the galaxy burn instead of having him dead. As the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, he was the head of everyone, and he was really the one who took full responsibility for the Jedi's collapse. Palpatine knew this, and he knew that the psychological damage caused by Order 66 was way worse than death for many Jedi, including Yoda. This, of course, is why we see Yoda in hiding for so long. See, Yoda never helped out with the rebellion, and at first he didn't even want to train Luke, and that's because of the guilt and shame he felt. Out of every Jedi who survived these tragic events, nobody felt more responsible than him. This was his Jedi Order, and he felt shame for not seeing the truth behind Sidious all along, and for being so clouded by darkness all this time. So when everything went down, he went into a severe state of sadness and isolated himself for these few decades. To take it one step further, he even let go of his lightsaber. He did this as a way to really put his Jedi weapon in the past, and put the era of fighting behind him. Instead, he actually used a bow and arrow sometimes while in exile, and would really just spend his days hunting for food with it and cooking. It was tragic, especially to see a Grandmaster like him, who was once so powerful and wise, become this hermit now. And the crazy part is, Palpatine knew this. Of course he didn't know that he was on Dagobah, but he did know that Yoda would live with this guilt and shame. So what better way to make him suffer than to force him to watch the Imperial flag wave across the galaxy? In Palpatine's eyes, Yoda was already defeated, just in a different way. However, that's just the first reason why the Empire never hunted Yoda. On top of that, Palpatine, Vader, and the Empire had far larger priorities than just tracking down one hidden Jedi Master. At first, yeah, the Jedi were a threat, since it wasn't long ago where they were in control of the galaxy. But as the years passed, Jedi were dying left and right. In time, they weren't really a threat at all anymore, and so Palpatine never saw Yoda as a threat to his power, because there was simply nothing he could do. So the Empire started shifting a lot of their focuses over the years, and like I just mentioned, they had way bigger priorities. Every Imperial resource started mainly being focused on controlling the Senate, expanding its military, and most of all, the Death Star. Palpatine, Tarkin, along with many others, really started devoting all their focus towards the construction of the Death Star, and making sure that it was ready in a timely manner. So a lot of time was dedicated to that, rather than having to search through countless worlds just to find one Jedi Master. On top of that, there wasn't even a guarantee that they'd find Yoda. Palpatine knew that Yoda was smart, so we can only assume that he knew that Yoda would choose a planet that was far away from everything and anything. With that, the effort to find him wasn't worth the reward, and so Palpatine stopped caring as time went on. However, let's get into Vader here. We've spoken a bit on why Palpatine didn't go after Yoda, but Vader's reasoning is a bit different. First off, Vader wasn't necessarily a Jedi hunter. See, I know I mentioned earlier that Palpatine made Vader and the Inquisitors do his dirty work, but Vader himself rarely ever did the hunting. A lot of people think that after Order 66, that's all he did, but he actually didn't. See, instead, his primary role was serving as Palpatine's political enforcer. In other words, he was basically Palpatine's representative. Vader's missions mainly focused on maintaining Imperial control, intimidating senators who opposed the Empire, and also crushing any resistance movements. At times, he'd also punish military personnel whenever it was needed, like we've seen countless times before. Palpatine himself rarely ever took care of any of this, so Vader would be at the forefront doing any of his biddings for him. Now, because Vader's plate was full with all of this, his encounters with Jedi were pretty rare. Instead, he'd have his full team of Inquisitors handle that, as they were the ones responsible for hunting Jedi full-time. Now, if there was a rare occasion where these Inquisitors failed, yeah, he would step in, but it was rare. Vader had other duties to accomplish, so that was more up to his Inquisitors to take care of, not him. By Vader going after Yoda, that would force him to abandon the duties that Palpatine considered more important. The only time Vader really went out of his way for a Jedi was of course for Obi-Wan, but that was it really. The only reason Obi-Wan was up on his priority list was because of the previous history between them, and of course the obsession Vader had with getting revenge on him. Unlike Obi-Wan, he wasn't really hungry for revenge against Yoda or anything like that. However, there was one thing that set him apart from most Jedi. Something that Vader knew. His skill. Vader knew how powerful Yoda was, and that was something that he had to be aware of. See, ever since Mustafar, he was no longer the warrior he once was. He wasn't athletic, acrobatic, or even as strong in the Force like he used to be. His injuries permanently weakened him physically, and his suit restricted his movement a ton. Now, he did compensate for these restrictions by developing pure brute strength and aggression. Day in and day out, he tapped more and more into his rage, and this kind of made up for his losses in some ways. Against the average Jedi, this was enough, and as we've seen countless times, Vader made light work of many Jedi. However, Yoda was a bit different. Relying on pure strength and anger wasn't enough against someone like Yoda, especially considering he was literally the Grand Master of the Jedi Order. Yoda himself fought against Palpatine and nearly defeated him, so imagine against Vader. Palpatine was the most powerful Sith Lord, and Yoda didn't hesitate to challenge him, as he put up an extremely good fight against him. Vader was fully aware of this fact, and so knowing Yoda was still around after Order 66, he had to tread carefully. This was something that Palpatine even reminded him at one point. Not long after his injuries, Palpatine told Vader that he should be grateful that Yoda didn't go to Mustafar instead of Obi-Wan. Unlike Obi-Wan, Yoda wouldn't have let him live, and so just hearing this, Vader knew how strong in the Force Yoda was. If Vader did abandon his duties and went to hunt Yoda, there was a huge chance he'd lose. This was a risk Vader couldn't take, and even more than that, this was also a risk Palpatine wasn't willing to take. In order for the Empire to be in control, Palpatine needed Vader. Vader was the glue to the Empire's success, which was a huge reason why Palpatine chose to save him back then instead of leaving him to die. Without Vader, the Empire wouldn't be as powerful, so risking losing Vader to a Jedi Master that was irrelevant at this point wasn't worth it. On top of that, it goes a bit further than Vader knowing this was a risky fight. See, after entering his suit, we talked about how many physical limitations Vader had. However, his main weakness wasn't physical, it was mental. Vader's greatest weakness was that Anakin Skywalker still existed within him. Every day, he was haunted by memories. Losing Padme, losing Obi-Wan, the Jedi Order, and of course the family he could have had. Someone like Yoda represented everything that connected to Anakin's former life. He embodied the Jedi Order that Vader betrayed, and the teachings he abandoned. By confronting Yoda, that would force him to face his past, and even painful truths about himself, which he wasn't willing to do. Crazy enough though, this wasn't the only time Vader avoided facing his past. After Order 66, Vader spent years avoiding two specific planets, Naboo and Tatooine, two planets that brought him so many painful memories. So Vader avoided these places, and that's a huge reason why he never sensed Luke growing up there for all those years. Going to Tatooine would have forced him to confront his past, which was something he wasn't willing to do. So, going back to Yoda, Vader had every reason to avoid that confrontation both physically and mentally. But with that, that concludes every reason why Vader never hunted Yoda down after Order 66. But say he did hunt him down, what would actually happen? Well, in the video on screen now, we dive into that exact what-if scenario. Anyways, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you, always.